A wealthy black man goes undercover to one of his luxury hotels and is greeted by a racist manager. The manager thinks that the black man does not belong there and calls security on him. Later, the racist manager is shocked when he is invited to the company headquarters and sees the black man at the head of the table. Jerome Hudson stepped into the lobby of his own luxury hotel, blending in with the bustle of guests and staff. He had chosen his outfit carefully, casual jeans and a plain jacket. It was a stark contrast to the usual designer suits he wore, and today he was just another face in the crowd. The grandiose decor of the lobby seemed almost surreal as he took in the high ceilings, the crystal chandeliers, and the polished marble floors. He stood for a moment, observing the flow of people around him. Business travelers with their crisp attire and polished shoes, vacationers chatting excitedly as they admired the lavish surroundings. The front desk staff moved with practiced efficiency, assisting guests with polite smiles. But Jerome wasn't here for leisure or business. Today, he was on a personal mission. As he approached the front desk, he caught sight of James Parker, the hotel manager. Mid-50s, graying hair neatly combed back, and an air of self-importance that seemed almost palpable. Jerome had heard things about this man, whispers among the staff and a few complaints that had crossed his desk. He needed to see for himself. "Good afternoon," Jerome said, stepping up to the desk. "I have a reservation." James glanced at him, his smile tight and controlled. "Are you sure you're in the right place, sir?" Jerome kept his tone even. "Yes, I'm sure. The reservation should be under Hudson." James's eyes narrowed, a barely perceptible shift in his expression. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I think you might be lost, sir. Perhaps a more affordable option would be better suited for your needs." Jerome's grip tightened on the strap of his bag, but he kept his voice calm. "I'm not lost. I'd like to check in." James gave him a dismissive look and turned his back to him, typing something on the computer. "We don't usually accommodate walk-ins, especially those without a reservation, and you don't seem like the type to have booked a room here in advance." Jerome raised an eyebrow, watching as James continued to tap away, making no effort to actually search for his reservation. "You didn't even check the system." James sighed, clearly irritated now. "I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding, but this is a luxury hotel, and we can't have people just wandering in, taking up space." He glanced over Jerome's outfit, his eyes lingering on the worn edges of his jacket. "We have an image to maintain." "I'm not wandering in. I have a reservation," Jerome repeated, feeling his patience slip. "If you'd just look it up, you'd see it." James straightened up, his voice louder now. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. This isn't a place for, well, you get the idea." Jerome's heart pounded in his chest. He knew exactly what James meant, even if he hadn't said it outright. He felt the familiar sting of anger rising, but he forced it down. "All I'm asking is for you to do your job and check the reservation." By now, people in the lobby were starting to glance their way, sensing the tension. James's eyes darted around, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "I've already asked you to leave. Security will be here shortly." Jerome took a deep breath, then pulled out his phone. "I'll show you my confirmation email." James's face twisted in annoyance. "Enough. You need to leave, or I'll have you removed." Jerome held his ground, raising his voice slightly. "I have a reservation. I'm a guest here, and you have no right." But before he could finish, two uniformed security guards appeared at James's side. They were large men, their expressions impassive as they looked at Jerome. "Please escort this gentleman off the premises," James said, waving a hand dismissively. One of the guards stepped forward. "Sir, we need you to leave." Jerome's heart sank. He could see the curious stares of other guests, the whispers starting as people tried to figure out what was going on. He felt a flush of embarrassment and frustration. He didn't want to make a scene, but he also couldn't let this slide. "I have a reservation," he insisted, holding up his phone. "Just look at it." The guard glanced at James, who shook his head firmly. "I don't care what you show them. You're not staying here." Jerome knew when he was being stonewalled. Reluctantly, he nodded to the guards. "Fine, I'll go." As they escorted him out, he caught a glimpse of James's satisfied smirk. It stung more than he cared to admit. The humiliation of being treated like this, in his own hotel, was almost too much to bear. He glanced back once, meeting James's eyes. For a split second, he considered revealing everything. But no, this wasn't the time. Not yet. Jerome stepped out into the chilly air, feeling a mix of anger and resolve harden inside him. This wasn't over. He'd be back. And next time, James Parker wouldn't be smirking. Jerome Hudson stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, the city skyline stretching out beneath him. The room, filled with modern art and sleek furniture, felt almost oppressive tonight. He stared at the lights twinkling in the distance, his thoughts racing back to the humiliating encounter at the hotel earlier that day. Despite the luxury and power he'd amassed, that interaction had stung deeply. He turned as his assistant, Laura Green, entered the room. Laura was always composed, her professionalism unwavering. She carried a tablet under her arm, her expression concerned as she approached. "You look like you're ready to set the whole city on fire," she said softly, trying to ease the tension. Jerome managed a tight smile. "Not quite, but I'm definitely not happy." Laura sat on the sofa, setting her tablet down on the coffee table. "I got your message." "What happened?" Jerome took a deep breath, his frustration simmering just below the surface. "I went to the hotel today, in casual clothes, to see how the staff treats people when they think no one's watching. And it was worse than I expected." Laura's eyes widened. "Worse? What did they do?" Jerome crossed the room and sat across from her, leaning forward. "The manager, James Parker, didn't even check my reservation. He just looked at me and decided I didn't belong there. Called security and had me thrown out." Laura's jaw tightened. "He didn't know who you were?" "No," Jerome shook his head. "And I didn't tell him. I wanted to see how far he'd go." Laura was quiet for a moment, her fingers tapping lightly on the edge of her tablet. "So what's the plan?" Jerome looked at her, his gaze steady. "I'm going back, but this time I'll be more prepared. I want to see if it's just him or if it's a pattern with the whole staff. And if it is?" Laura asked, her voice careful. "Then I'll deal with it, swiftly." Jerome's voice was calm, but the edge in his tone was unmistakable. "This kind of behavior can't be tolerated, especially not in my own business." Laura nodded slowly. "You're sure you don't want to reveal who you are right away? It would be a lot easier." Jerome shook his head. "If I do that, they'll just pretend to be on their best behavior. I need to know what's really going on when they think no one's watching." Laura frowned, glancing down at her tablet. "You know this could get ugly. If they catch on, it could blow up." "I'm aware." Jerome's gaze was unyielding. "But I won't let that stop me." There was a pause as Laura absorbed his words. "All right, so what's the next step?" Jerome leaned back, folding his arms across his chest. "I'll go back tomorrow, but this time dressed differently. Maybe in a suit. I want to see if it makes any difference." "If James treats me differently just because of what I'm wearing," Laura nodded, making a note on her tablet. "And if he does, then I know it's personal. If it's not about how I look, but who he thinks I am, I'll have all the proof I need." Jerome's voice was calm, but the determination behind it was clear. Laura looked up at him, her eyes serious. "You're really going to go through with this?" "Yes," Jerome said without hesitation. "I built this company from the ground up. I can't have people like him running my hotels and treating guests like this." Laura studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, I'll make sure everything's ready for tomorrow. But if you feel like it's getting too risky, I'll be fine," Jerome interrupted gently. "But thank you, Laura. I appreciate your concern." She gave him a small smile. "Just doing my job." Jerome stood, glancing back out at the city. "We're going to change things, Laura. No more excuses. If this is happening in one hotel, it could be happening in others. I need to know." Laura rose as well, her expression resolute. "And we'll find out. You can count on that." Jerome turned back to her, the weight of the day finally catching up with him. "Thank you, Laura, for always being there." She smiled again, this time warmer. "You're welcome, Jerome. Now get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." He nodded, watching as she gathered her things and left. Alone in the quiet penthouse, Jerome let out a long breath. Tomorrow, he'd go back. He'd face James again, this time with a clearer head and a firmer resolve. Whatever it took, he was going to uncover the truth, and when he did, there would be no hiding from the consequences. For James Parker, and anyone else who thought they could get away with treating people like they were less than human. Jerome glanced at the city one last time before turning away. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, he would begin to make things right. Jerome adjusted his suit jacket, glancing at his reflection in the mirror. The tailored dark gray suit and crisp white shirt were a sharp contrast to his casual appearance the day before. He looked every bit the successful businessman he was. Today, he wasn't hiding. He wanted to see if his presence, dressed as he usually would be, would change anything. The lobby was just as busy as it had been the previous day. Guests moved around, some checking in, others chatting in the lounge area, the soft hum of conversations blending with the faint background music. Jerome took a moment to take it all in. He spotted James Parker at the front desk, his posture rigid, scanning the crowd with a practiced eye. Jerome strode confidently towards the desk, the polished leather of his shoes clicking against the marble floor. As he approached, James's eyes flicked up, a polite but impersonal smile forming on his lips. Jerome could see the man didn't recognize him. He probably saw so many people in a day that a face, even one he'd wronged, was just another blur. "Good afternoon," Jerome said, keeping his voice measured and even. James's smile widened slightly, his tone much friendlier than it had been yesterday. "Good afternoon, sir. How can I assist you today?" Jerome nodded towards the check-in counter. "I'd like to book a room." James hesitated, glancing at the computer screen before returning his gaze to Jerome. I'm afraid we're fully booked today, sir. There's a convention in town, and all our rooms are occupied. Jerome knew this wasn't true. He had checked the booking system earlier. There were still several suites available. He decided to press further, curious to see how far James would go. Are you sure? I thought I saw some rooms available online. James's smile became strained. Our online system isn't always accurate. We've been fully booked for days now. Jerome raised an eyebrow, pretending to consider. That's surprising. I'm a frequent guest here, and usually there's something available for me. James's expression shifted, a flicker of impatience crossing his face. I'm sorry, but we're completely full. Maybe try another hotel? I'm sure there are options more suited to your needs. The implication was subtle but unmistakable. Jerome felt a familiar surge of irritation but kept his voice calm. And what needs would those be? James's eyes narrowed slightly. Well, a hotel that has availability for one. As I said, we're full. Jerome took a slow breath, his gaze steady. I'm aware of your availability. I know there are rooms open. James stiffened, his voice taking on a condescending edge. Sir, I assure you, we have no rooms available. I don't want to waste your time. Jerome held James's gaze, the man's smugness and dismissive tone grating on him. He considered revealing who he was, forcing the man to backpedal, but decided against it. Not yet. He needed more. I see. Well, I'll take my business elsewhere then. James nodded, relief flickering across his features. Thank you for understanding, sir. I hope you find suitable accommodations. Jerome turned and walked away, his jaw clenched in frustration. He could feel the stares of other guests as he made his way towards the exit. Some curious, others oblivious. He paused just before reaching the doors, glancing back at James. The man had already moved on, greeting another guest with that same practiced smile. The anger simmered beneath the surface as Jerome left the hotel. He had seen enough. James Parker wasn't just rude or dismissive. He was discriminatory, turning away anyone he deemed unworthy, regardless of their legitimacy as guests. Jerome knew now that it wasn't just about his appearance yesterday, or even his casual clothes. It was about control and power, and James's need to exert both over people he didn't deem as his equals. Back outside, Jerome pulled out his phone, his fingers flying over the screen as he sent a quick message to Laura. He did it again. Told me the hotel was fully booked when it's not. We need to move forward. Laura's reply came almost instantly. Understood. I'll make the arrangements. Jerome slipped his phone back into his pocket, his mind already working through the next steps. This wasn't just about James anymore. If he allowed this behavior to go unchecked, it would spread like a virus through his business. He couldn't let that happen. It was time to confront this issue head-on. As he walked down the street, his thoughts churned. He'd given James a chance to redeem himself, to show that his behavior yesterday had been a one-time mistake. But the man had doubled down, proving that his prejudice was more deeply rooted than Jerome had hoped. Now, there would be consequences. The next step was crucial. Jerome needed to confront James in a setting where he held all the power, where there could be no excuses or dodging the truth. And that setting was the company's headquarters. He would bring James there, under the guise of a meeting, and reveal everything. But not just yet. For now, he'd give the man one more day. One more chance to see the error of his ways. If James chose to ignore that, Jerome would be ready. And this time, there would be no misunderstandings about who held the real power. Jerome sat behind his large mahogany desk, the expansive cityscape visible through the glass walls of his office. The morning light spilled into the room, casting a warm glow over the sleek, minimalist decor. But there was no warmth in Jerome's expression as he stared at the document on his computer screen. It was a detailed report on James Parker, listing complaints and issues that had been quietly swept under the rug for years. It seemed this manager's behavior was not a recent development. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in," he called, his voice calm but firm. Laura entered, her face serious as she carried a small folder. She crossed the room swiftly and took a seat in front of his desk. "I've got everything ready for you," she said, placing the folder down. Jerome leaned forward, opening the folder to reveal a detailed plan. He skimmed over it, nodding as he read. "Good. I want to make sure this goes smoothly." "It will," Laura assured him. "I've scheduled the meeting with James for tomorrow morning. He thinks it's for a potential promotion." Jerome's lips curled into a small, humorless smile. A promotion. He's going to be in for a shock. Laura watched him carefully. "Are you sure this is how you want to handle it? It could backfire if he reacts badly." "I know," Jerome said, meeting her gaze. "But I need him to understand the consequences of his actions. If he thinks he's untouchable, that he can treat people however he likes and still move up in the company, then he's a danger to everything I've built." Laura nodded, though her brow was furrowed in concern. I just want to make sure you're prepared for whatever happens. People like him don't usually admit they're wrong. I'm not expecting an apology, Jerome said, his tone measured. I just want him out. He's a liability, and the longer he stays in that position, the more damage he'll do. Laura sighed, glancing down at her notes. There's one more thing. He's going to be expecting some sort of formal recognition if he thinks he's getting a promotion. Should I prepare a fake commendation or something to keep up the pretense? Jerome considered this, then shook his head. No, I want him to come in here, thinking he's about to get rewarded for his behavior. It'll make the impact of what's really happening that much stronger. Laura raised an eyebrow. And when he realizes it's not what he thinks? Jerome's expression hardened. Then we'll see if he's as bold when he's facing the consequences of his actions. The room was silent for a moment as Laura absorbed his words. Finally, she nodded. I'll make sure everything is in place. He'll be here at 10 tomorrow morning. I'll meet him at the lobby and bring him up. Perfect, Jerome said, leaning back in his chair. I want him to feel comfortable, to think everything is going exactly as he planned. Then we'll pull the rug out from under him. Laura couldn't help but smile a little at the intensity in his voice. You're really looking forward to this, aren't you? Jerome's smile faded, replaced by a look of grim determination. It's not about enjoying it. It's about making sure people like him understand that they don't get to treat others like dirt and get away with it. If I let this slide, it sends a message that I condone this kind of behavior. You're right, Laura said softly, but don't forget to protect yourself in all this. He might try to turn things around and paint you as the villain. Jerome nodded. I've thought of that. That's why I'm going to be very careful with my words tomorrow. I won't give him any ammunition to use against me. Laura glanced at the clock. I'll go make sure everything is set up for tomorrow. Do you want to go over anything else? Jerome shook his head. No. That's all for now. Just make sure security is discreet but ready in case he tries to cause trouble. Understood, Laura said as she stood. I'll handle everything. As she turned to leave, Jerome's voice stopped her. Laura? She paused, looking back at him. Yes? Thank you, he said quietly. I know this isn't part of your job description, but I appreciate your support. Laura smiled, a genuine warmth in her expression. It's no problem, Jerome. You're doing the right thing, and I'm here to help in any way I can. She left the office, closing the door softly behind her. Jerome leaned back in his chair, staring out at the city once more. Tomorrow would be a turning point, not just for James Parker, but for the company as a whole. He had built his business on the values of respect and excellence, and he would be damned if he let someone like James tarnish that. He took a deep breath, pushing down the lingering frustration from his encounters with the man. He had to stay calm, focused. Tomorrow, everything would change. James would learn that actions have consequences, and no amount of arrogance or entitlement could protect him from that. For the rest of the day, Jerome reviewed his strategy, making sure every detail was in place. He went over his own role in the meeting, planning his words carefully. He knew that once James realized what was happening, things could get heated, but Jerome was prepared for that. He wasn't just confronting James for himself. He was doing it for everyone who had been dismissed, mistreated, or looked down upon by people like James Parker. The afternoon sunlight dimmed as evening approached, casting long shadows across the room. Jerome finally stood, stretching his arms and letting out a long breath. He felt a sense of anticipation building within him. This wasn't just about a single manager at a single hotel. This was about setting a standard, showing his employees and his customers that he would not tolerate prejudice or mistreatment of any kind. Tomorrow he would make that clear, and he was ready for whatever came next. James Parker walked through the grand lobby of the corporate headquarters with a confident stride. He'd received a call yesterday about a potential promotion, and he couldn't think of a single reason why he wouldn't be getting it. He had managed the hotel for years, keeping everything running smoothly, maintaining the prestigious image that guests expected. In his mind, he was the perfect candidate for any advancement. He glanced around at the sleek decor as Laura Green approached him in the lobby. She wore a polite smile, her professional demeanor making it clear she wasn't just another staff member. Mr. Parker, welcome. Please follow me, she said, gesturing toward the elevator. James nodded, adjusting his tie. Thank you, Ms. Green. Do you know what this meeting is about? Laura's smile didn't falter. I believe Mr. Hudson wants to discuss some opportunities within the company. James felt a thrill of satisfaction. Opportunities. He knew what that meant. He'd heard whispers about a regional director position opening up, and he was certain he was in line for it. After all, who else could be better suited? They stepped into the elevator, and Laura pressed the button for the top floor. As the elevator ascended, James glanced over at her. I've heard great things about Mr. Hudson, he said, making conversation. He's done wonders for this company. Laura's response was calm and measured. He's very committed to ensuring the highest standards are upheld. James nodded. That's what I aim to do as well. Maintain the brand's reputation. The elevator doors opened, and Laura led him down a hallway lined with framed photographs of the company's most luxurious properties. James couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. He'd worked hard to keep his hotel at the top of the list. Now it seemed, all that work was about to pay off. Laura stopped in front of a large polished door and knocked lightly before opening it. "Mr. Parker is here, sir." Jerome Hudson looked up from his desk, his expression unreadable. He stood and extended his hand as James walked in. "Mr. Parker, good to see you. Please have a seat." "Thank you, sir." James shook Jerome's hand firmly, his smile confident as he took a seat opposite the desk. Laura closed the door behind them, leaving the two men alone. Jerome settled back into his chair, observing James for a moment. The silence stretched just long enough to be uncomfortable. "I understand you've been managing the hotel for quite some time now," Jerome began, his tone neutral. James straightened, eager to impress. "Yes, sir. I've been the manager there for almost 10 years. We've consistently ranked among the top in guest satisfaction. And I've personally overseen numerous renovations and staff training programs to ensure we maintain our high standards." Jerome nodded slowly. "I've seen the reports. The numbers are certainly impressive." James's chest swelled with pride. "Thank you, sir. I always strive to exceed expectations." Jerome's gaze was steady. "Exceed expectations. That's interesting. Tell me, how do you ensure that all guests have an exceptional experience at the hotel?" James paused, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "Well, I focus on maintaining a high level of service and professionalism. We cater to a discerning clientele, so I make sure the staff understands the importance of presenting the right image." "The right image," Jerome repeated thoughtfully. "And what exactly does that mean to you?" James shifted in his seat, sensing something in Jerome's tone, but not quite grasping it. "It means ensuring that the hotel and its staff reflect the luxury and exclusivity of the brand. We can't afford to have anything, or anyone, that detracts from that image." Jerome's expression didn't change. "So, you believe that certain people might not fit the image of the hotel?" James hesitated, his confidence wavering slightly. "Well, it's important to maintain a certain standard. We need to be selective about who we allow to occupy our spaces, both staff and guests." Jerome leaned forward, his voice calm but carrying an edge. "Selective. Can you give me an example of what that looks like in practice?" James felt a bead of sweat form at his temple. Something about Jerome's demeanor was unsettling. "I just mean that we need to be vigilant. Not everyone who walks through the doors is there to stay. Sometimes people try to take advantage of the hotel's facilities without being paying guests." Jerome's gaze was piercing. "Like the man you turned away 2 days ago?" James blinked, caught off guard. "I'm not sure I know what you mean." Jerome didn't blink. 2 days ago, you turned away a man at the front desk. You told him the hotel was full, even though it wasn't. You called security on him without checking his reservation." James's mouth went dry. "Sir, if someone was causing a disturbance, I had to act in the best interest of the hotel." "Causing a disturbance?" Jerome's voice was deceptively mild. "This man simply asked you to check his reservation. You refused. Why?" James struggled to keep his composure. I thought he wasn't a legitimate guest. We've had problems before with people trying to use the lobby without staying in the hotel. And you made that judgment based on what? His appearance?" Jerome's voice sharpened. James flinched, a cold dread spreading through him. "Sir, I was just trying to protect the hotel's reputation. I didn't mean to offend anyone." Jerome leaned back, his eyes never leaving James's face. "You didn't mean to offend anyone, but you did, repeatedly. And do you know why?" James swallowed hard, his confidence completely gone now. "No, sir, because that man you turned away was me." Jerome's voice was hard now, the calm exterior cracking. "I was the one you refused to check in, twice, despite having a reservation." James's face went pale. I didn't recognize you. If I had known, it shouldn't matter if you recognized me or not," Jerome interrupted, his tone cold. "Every guest should be treated with respect, not judged on appearance or any other superficial measure." James stammered, his mind racing. "Sir, I was only trying to do my job. I thought I was protecting the hotel." Jerome's eyes narrowed. "Protecting the hotel from what, exactly? From people who don't meet your personal standards?" "Sir, please," James pleaded, his voice shaking. "I'm sorry. I didn't know it was you. I would never have. But it wasn't just me, was it?" Jerome's voice was like ice. "There have been other complaints, other guests who have felt mistreated or disrespected by you. I've read the reports, James. This isn't an isolated incident." James was trembling now, all his earlier confidence shattered. "Please, give me another chance. I can do better." Jerome's gaze was steely. "You've had your chances, James, and you've shown me exactly who you are. This company stands for something. Excellence, integrity, respect, and you don't embody any of those values." James's eyes darted around the room, desperation clear on his face. "Please, sir, I've worked here for years. I've dedicated everything to this company. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Jerome shook his head slowly. It's too late for that. Effective immediately. You're terminated from your position. James's mouth dropped open. Terminated? You can't be serious. I'll sue. This is wrongful termination. Jerome stood, his expression unyielding. You can try, but I assure you, you won't win. You've been given every opportunity to correct your behavior, and you've failed at every turn. Now, you have to face the consequences. James stood as well, anger and fear warring in his eyes. You're making a mistake. I've done nothing but serve this company. Jerome's voice was calm but firm. And you've done it with prejudice and arrogance. That's not service. That's selfishness. James clenched his fists, his face flushed with rage. This isn't over. Jerome's gaze didn't waver. Yes, it is. Security will escort you out. As if on cue, 2 security guards appeared at the door. James shot Jerome one last furious look before storming out, the guards following closely behind. Jerome stood alone in the office, the tension slowly draining from his body. It was done. James Parker was gone. The hotel would be better for it, and so would the company. But Jerome knew this was just the beginning. There were deeper issues to address, and he was ready to face them head on. He took a deep breath, his mind already turning to the next steps. This was about more than just one manager. It was about setting a precedent, ensuring that everyone who represented his brand understood what it stood for. And he wouldn't rest until that standard was upheld across the board. The real work begins now, he thought to himself. Jerome stood alone in his office, staring out at the city below. The confrontation with James Parker had gone exactly as planned. The man's shock, his desperate attempts to defend himself, and his final outburst, every moment had unfolded just as Jerome had expected. Yet despite the satisfaction of seeing justice served, there was a heaviness in his chest. He turned away from the window, walking back to his desk. The tension in the air still lingered, and he needed a moment to collect himself. As he sat down, his phone buzzed with a message from Laura. Laura, James has left the building. Security reported no incidents. Jerome sighed, relieved. He had half expected James to cause a scene on his way out, but it seemed the man had accepted his fate, at least for now. He typed a quick response and set the phone aside, leaning back in his chair. His mind drifted to the events of the past few days. From the initial encounter in the hotel lobby to the final showdown in this office, it had all been a whirlwind. He remembered the look on James's face when he realized who Jerome really was. Anger, disbelief, and finally, fear. It was a stark contrast to the arrogance and dismissiveness he had displayed at the hotel. Jerome glanced at the folder on his desk, the one containing the details of James's behavior over the years. It was thick with complaints, each one a testament to the man's pattern of discrimination and condescension. And yet, it had taken Jerome going undercover to bring it all to light. That thought troubled him. How many others in his organization were being mistreated or ignored because they didn't have the power to speak up? He picked up the folder and flipped through it again, skimming over the reports. Each story was different, but the pattern was the same. Guests and employees feeling marginalized, dismissed, or outright humiliated by someone who thought he was above them. It made Jerome's blood boil. He had built his company on the principles of respect and inclusion, and seeing those values so blatantly violated was infuriating. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, setting the folder down. Laura stepped inside, her expression serious but calm. "I just spoke with security." James left quietly, but he looked pretty shaken. Jerome nodded. "Good. Hopefully he'll take some time to reflect on what's happened." Laura hesitated, then asked, "Do you think he will? Reflect, I mean?" Jerome sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I don't know, Laura. Some people never change. But I couldn't just let him stay and continue to hurt people." "I know," Laura said softly. "You did the right thing, but you should also be prepared for him to fight back. People like James don't go down easily." Jerome's jaw tightened. "I'm not afraid of him. If he tries to take this to court, we'll handle it. The evidence is solid." Laura nodded, then glanced at the folder on the desk. "I read through some of those reports. It's amazing how long he got away with it. That's what bothers me the most," Jerome admitted. "He wasn't just an isolated problem. This could be happening in other hotels with other managers. I need to make sure this kind of behavior is rooted out everywhere. Do you have a plan for that?" Laura asked, sitting down across from him. Jerome tapped the folder with his fingers. "We're going to implement a new training program, mandatory for all staff, from the top down. Everyone will undergo sensitivity training and performance reviews. And there will be a hotline for guests and employees to report any misconduct directly to corporate. No more hiding behind layers of bureaucracy." "That sounds like a good start," Laura agreed. "But you know it's going to be met with resistance. People don't like being told to change." Jerome's expression hardened. they'll have to deal with it. I won't let this company become a breeding ground for prejudice and discrimination. If they don't like it, they can leave. Laura studied him for a moment, then nodded. I believe in what you're doing, Jerome. And I'll support you every step of the way. Thank you, Laura, Jerome said, his voice softening. I appreciate that. She stood up, giving him a reassuring smile. You're welcome. And remember, you're not alone in this. There are plenty of people in this company who share your vision and want to see it succeed. Jerome watched her leave, her words lingering in his mind. He knew she was right. There were good people in his organization, people who believed in the values he had built the company on. But he also knew that for every good person, there were others like James, hiding behind their titles and authority, using their positions to enforce their own biases. He turned back to the window, the city stretching out before him like a vast, uncharted territory. He had fought hard to build his empire, to create something that stood for excellence and integrity. But now he realized the real work was just beginning. He couldn't be everywhere at once, couldn't see every interaction or hear every conversation. But he could set the standard, create a culture where everyone knew what was expected and what wouldn't be tolerated. His phone buzzed again, this time with a call. It was Michael, his attorney. Jerome? I've just heard from James's lawyer, Michael said as soon as he answered. They're threatening to sue for wrongful termination. Let them try, Jerome said coldly. I'm not backing down. Michael was silent for a moment, then he said, I thought you'd say that. We'll be prepared. Thanks, Michael, Jerome said, his voice softening. I appreciate your support. Always, Michael replied. I'll keep you updated. Jerome ended the call and leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. So James wanted to fight. Fine. He would fight back. He would show everyone that this wasn't just about one man or one incident. This was about the kind of company he wanted to run, the kind of world he wanted to help build. As the sun set over the city, casting long shadows across the office, Jerome felt a new sense of resolve. He would face whatever challenges came his way, not just for himself, but for everyone who believed in what he was trying to achieve. James Parker was just the beginning. There would be others, and Jerome would be ready for them. Because this was more than just business. This was about justice. And he wasn't going to let anyone stand in the way of that. Jerome arrived early at the office the next morning, his mind focused and clear. The events of the past few days had been a whirlwind of emotions and decisions, but now it was time to face the next battle. As he settled into his chair, his phone buzzed. It was Michael, his attorney. Jerome, I've just received the official notice from James's lawyer. They're filing for wrongful termination, Michael said, his tone calm but direct. Jerome took a deep breath, nodding to himself. I expected this. What's their argument? Michael sighed. They're claiming that you terminated him without due process, that it was a personal vendetta, and that you violated the company's own procedures in the process. Jerome clenched his jaw, a wave of frustration washing over him. That's absurd. We have documented evidence of his misconduct and followed all the necessary steps. They're grasping at straws, Jerome, Michael said, his voice reassuring. But their goal is to force a settlement. They're counting on you not wanting this to go public, hoping you'll agree to pay them off to avoid a drawn-out legal battle. Jerome shook his head. I'm not settling. This is about more than just James. If we back down now, it sends the wrong message to everyone in the company. It tells them that if you push hard enough, you can get away with anything. I understand, Michael replied. But you need to be prepared. They're going to dig up everything they can on you and try to twist it to fit their narrative. Jerome took a deep breath, letting the tension drain from his shoulders. I'm ready for that. I won't let them intimidate me. Good, Michael said. We've got a strong case. The evidence against James is overwhelming, and we followed every procedure by the book. But they'll still try to paint you as a tyrant who acted out of personal spite. Jerome's voice was firm. I acted because he was mistreating people. This isn't about revenge. It's about holding people accountable. That's exactly the message we need to convey, Michael agreed. We'll build our case around that. The evidence of his behavior, the complaints from guests and staff, all of it will show that this was a necessary decision, not a personal vendetta. Jerome nodded, feeling a surge of determination. I want to go on the offensive. I'm not just going to defend my actions. I want to show exactly why what he did was unacceptable. Absolutely, Michael said. We'll use the guest complaints, the internal reports, all of it. We'll paint a clear picture of his behavior and the impact it had on the company's values and reputation. They spent the next hour discussing their strategy, reviewing evidence, and preparing for the legal maneuvers James's team might attempt. Jerome listened carefully, his mind processing every detail. He knew this was going to be a tough fight, but he was ready. As the meeting wrapped up, Michael leaned forward, his expression serious. Jerome, I need you to be prepared for the personal attacks. They'll try to dig up anything from your past. Use any decision you've made to paint you in a negative light. Jerome met his gaze. I've lived my life with integrity, Michael. I'm not perfect, but I've always tried to do what's right. If they want to dig, let them. I have nothing to hide. Michael nodded, a hint of admiration in his eyes. We'll be ready for whatever they throw at us. After Michael left, Jerome remained in the conference room, his thoughts racing. He knew that James's team would stop at nothing to discredit him, to make it seem like he was the villain in this story. But he also knew that he couldn't let fear or doubt stop him from doing what he believed was right. He picked up the folder of complaints against James, flipping through the pages again. Each story was a reminder of why he had taken the actions he did. It wasn't just about his own experience with James. It was about the guests and employees who had suffered under his management, who had felt powerless and humiliated. Jerome's phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Laura. Laura, just got word that some staff at the hotel are nervous about the lawsuit. They're worried it's going to reflect badly on them and affect their jobs. Jerome frowned. He had anticipated pushback, but he hadn't considered the fear it might instill in his employees. He quickly typed a response. Jerome, arrange a meeting with the hotel staff. I want to talk to them directly, reassure them. This lawsuit isn't about them. It's about holding one person accountable. Laura, got it. I'll set it up. He put down his phone, his mind already turning to what he would say to the staff. He needed them to understand that this was a fight for the soul of the company, for the principles it stood on, and that he would protect them, just as he was standing up against James now. The rest of the day was a blur of meetings and phone calls. Jerome coordinated with his PR team to prepare statements for the media, anticipating the story would soon break. He knew they needed to be ahead of the narrative, to control the message from the start. By the time evening fell, he felt exhausted but resolute. He returned to his office, looking out at the city lights below. This fight was bigger than him, bigger than James. It was about ensuring that his company was a place where everyone felt valued and respected. His phone rang again. This time it was Laura. Hey Laura, he said, answering the call. I've arranged the meeting with the hotel staff for tomorrow morning, she said. Everyone will be there. I think it's a good idea for you to speak to them directly. Thanks, Laura. I'll be there, Jerome replied. I want them to know that I'm committed to protecting them, and that this lawsuit won't change that. They'll appreciate hearing that from you, Laura said, her voice warm. You've always been there for your employees, and this is no different. After they ended the call, Jerome sat back, his thoughts settling. Tomorrow would be another step in this fight, another opportunity to show everyone that he wasn't afraid to stand up for what was right. He glanced at the folder on his desk one last time before closing it. He had made the right decision in firing James, and he wouldn't let anyone convince him otherwise. No matter how messy or difficult the battle became, he would see it through, because this wasn't just about one man's behavior. It was about setting a standard for his entire company, about showing that integrity and respect were more than just words. They were principles to be upheld, no matter the cost. As the city outside buzzed with life, Jerome felt a deep sense of resolve. This was his fight, and he was ready for whatever came next. The courtroom was filled with a tense, expectant energy as Jerome Hudson entered, his attorney, Michael, by his side. He glanced around, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings, the polished wood paneling, the judge's bench elevated at the front, the rows of seats filled with spectators, reporters, and curious onlookers. This was the public stage that James Parker's team had been counting on, hoping to turn a straightforward case of accountability into a spectacle. Jerome's gaze settled on James, sitting with his own lawyers at the opposite table. The man looked tense, his jaw clenched, and his eyes darting around nervously. Gone was the arrogance he had displayed in the hotel, and during their confrontation at the office. Now, he was just another man grasping at straws, trying to salvage what was left of his reputation. The judge entered, and everyone rose. As they all took their seats again, Jerome took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. This wasn't going to be easy, but he had to stay focused. This was about more than just him or James. It was about setting a precedent for how his company, and hopefully others, would handle discrimination and mistreatment in the workplace. Mr. Parker, you claim that your termination was wrongful and motivated by personal vendetta, the judge said, addressing James directly. You also assert that Mr. Hudson acted outside the bounds of corporate policy in terminating your employment. Is that correct? James's lawyer, a man in his early 50s with a sharp, calculated demeanor, stood. Yes, Your Honor. We believe that Mr. Hudson, in a fit of personal animus, decided to terminate my client without just cause. We will show that this was not about my client's performance, but rather about Mr. Hudson's own desire to exact revenge after an embarrassing encounter. Jerome felt a flash of anger, but kept his expression neutral. Michael leaned over, whispering, "Stay calm. This is just the opening statement. We'll have our turn." The judge nodded. "Very well. Mr. Hudson, your response." Michael stood, his tone measured and professional. "Your Honor, we intend to show that Mr. Parker's termination was a direct result of his repeated discriminatory behavior towards guests and employees at one of Mr. Hudson's hotels. We will present evidence that this was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern of behavior that was damaging to the company's values and reputation." The judge made a note and looked up. "Proceed with your opening arguments." James's lawyer began by painting a picture of a long-standing, dedicated employee who had been blindsided by an overzealous CEO. He spoke of James's years of service, his commitment to maintaining the hotel's standards, and his supposed dedication to the company. It was a carefully constructed narrative, designed to elicit sympathy and cast doubt on Jerome's motives. When it was Michael's turn, he approached the podium with a calm authority. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, this case is not about a personal vendetta. It is about holding people accountable for their actions, regardless of their position within a company. Mr. Parker was not fired because of who he is, but because of what he did, repeatedly, and with complete disregard for the impact of his actions on those around him." He presented the first piece of evidence, a series of complaints filed by guests and staff. He read from one particularly detailed report. "I was made to feel unwelcome from the moment I arrived. Mr. Parker's demeanor was hostile, and he refused to even check my reservation, suggesting I was at the wrong place. I've never been so humiliated in my life." The courtroom was silent as the words hung in the air. Jerome could see the ripple of discomfort on James's face, a brief flicker of recognition that this was not going to be as easy as he had hoped. Michael continued, presenting more evidence, each piece meticulously documented. He showed emails from employees who felt mistreated or marginalized under James's management, reports of guests who had been turned away or treated with contempt, and a video clip from the hotel's security cameras showing James berating a staff member in the lobby. With each of these incidents, Mr. Parker showed a blatant disregard for the values of this company, Michael said, turning to the jury. Values of respect, integrity, and inclusivity. These were not isolated incidents, but part of a pattern that could not be ignored. When it was James's turn to testify, he was visibly nervous. His lawyer guided him through a series of questions designed to paint him as a loyal employee who had been unfairly targeted. But Jerome could see the cracks in his facade. There was a defensiveness in his answers, a reluctance to take responsibility for his actions. "Mr. Parker, can you explain why you turned away certain guests without checking their reservations?" Michael asked when he had the chance to cross-examine. James shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I was just trying to maintain the standards of the hotel. We have a certain type of clientele, and I thought it was my job to protect that image." "So you made these judgments based solely on appearance?" Michael pressed. James hesitated, then said, "It wasn't about appearance. It was about maintaining the integrity of the hotel." "Integrity?" Michael's voice was calm but pointed. "Turning away guests without checking their reservations, berating staff members in front of others. Do you consider that integrity?" James's face flushed. "I was doing what I thought was best for the hotel." "For the hotel or for yourself?" Michael asked, his gaze unwavering. James stammered, struggling to find an answer that wouldn't further incriminate him. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I was just doing my job." Michael nodded, then turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I think the evidence speaks for itself. Mr. Parker's actions were not in line with company policy or values. This is not about personal animosity. It's about ensuring that every guest and employee is treated with the respect they deserve." The judge nodded, making notes as Michael returned to his seat. Jerome felt a surge of pride. Michael had handled the cross-examination masterfully, keeping the focus on the facts and not letting James wriggle out of accountability. The rest of the trial followed a similar pattern. James's team tried to frame the situation as a misunderstanding, a case of an overworked manager who had made a few mistakes. But Michael's meticulous presentation of evidence, combined with witness testimonies from former employees and guests, painted a damning picture of a man who had used his position to belittle and demean others. When the time came for the final statements, Michael stood again. "Your Honor, this case is about more than one man's employment. It's about what we, as a society, are willing to accept in our workplaces and our communities. Mr. Parker was given every opportunity to change his behavior, and he chose not to. Mr. Hudson made the difficult but necessary decision to protect his company's values and its people. This was not an act of revenge, but an act of integrity." The judge nodded and turned to James's lawyer. "Mr. Dawson, your closing statement?" James's lawyer gave a polished but ultimately unconvincing speech, arguing that his client had been misunderstood, that he had acted with the best intentions, and that Jerome had overstepped his bounds in firing him. But Jerome could see the doubt in the faces of the jury members. The evidence was clear, and no amount of rhetoric could change that. After the closing arguments, the jury was dismissed to deliberate. Jerome sat in silence, his mind racing as he waited for the verdict. He had done everything he could to show the truth, to defend his actions and the values he believed in. Now, it was out of his hands. The jury returned quicker than expected. As they filed back into the courtroom, Jerome's heart pounded. He glanced at Michael, who gave him a reassuring nod. The judge asked the foreperson to stand. "Have you reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor," the foreperson said, holding a piece of paper in her hand. The room was silent as the judge took the paper and read the verdict aloud. "We find in favor of the defendant, Mr. Jerome Hudson. The termination of Mr. Parker was justified based on the evidence presented." Jerome felt a wave of relief wash over him. He glanced at Michael, who gave him a small, triumphant smile. James, on the other hand, looked crushed, his face pale and drawn as the reality of his defeat sank in. The judge continued, "Mr. Parker, your claims of wrongful termination are dismissed. This court finds that Mr. Hudson acted within his rights as an employer and in accordance with company policy." With that, the gavel came down and the case was closed. Jerome stood, shaking hands with Michael and the rest of his team, a sense of victory mingling with exhaustion. This was a win, not just for him, but for everyone who had been affected by James's actions. As he left the courtroom, the weight of the past few weeks began to lift. He knew there was still work to do, that this was just one battle in a much larger fight. But today, at least, justice had been served. He stepped outside into the sunlight, taking a deep breath. Reporters clustered around, microphones and cameras thrust forward, but Jerome raised a hand, signaling that he wouldn't be making any statements. There would be time for that later. For now, he just wanted a moment to reflect on what this victory meant. Laura was waiting by his car, her face lighting up when she saw him. "You did it," she said, her voice filled with pride. "We did it," Jerome corrected, smiling. "Thank you for everything, Laura. I couldn't have done this without you." She nodded, her eyes shining. "This is just the beginning, you know. There's still a lot of work to do." "I know," Jerome said, his voice resolute. "But today was an important step. We showed that we're serious about what we stand for." He looked back at the courthouse, the doors closing as people began to file out. This was just one victory, but it felt like a turning point. He knew there would be more challenges ahead, more battles to fight. But he was ready, because this wasn't just about winning a case. It was about building something better, something stronger. And he wouldn't stop until that vision became a reality. Jerome sat in his office, staring at the stack of documents in front of him. It had been a week since the trial concluded, and the dust was beginning to settle. The court's decision in his favor had been a relief, but the fallout was still reverberating throughout the company. He picked up one of the reports and skimmed it, his thoughts wandering back to the verdict and the look on James Parker's face as he realized he had lost. Since then, Jerome had received a flood of messages, some congratulatory, others filled with concern. The media had taken a particular interest in the case, framing it as a landmark decision in corporate accountability. While the publicity was largely positive, there were also those who questioned whether Jerome had been too harsh, whether firing James had been the right move. A soft knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in," he called, setting the report aside. Laura stepped inside, her expression serious. "I've just come from the HR department. There's something you need to see." Jerome frowned as she handed him a folder. He opened it, his eyes scanning the contents. It was an internal survey conducted among the hotel staff. The results were mixed, with many employees expressing relief that James was gone, but others worried about job security and the future of the hotel. "Some of the staff are feeling uncertain," Laura explained. "They're worried about the changes you're planning and what it means for them. There's a lot of anxiety, especially after everything that happened in court." Jerome nodded slowly. "I expected some pushback. Change is always difficult, especially after something this public." "There's more," Laura continued, her tone cautious. "We've had a few employees resign since the verdict. Some of them said they felt targeted or that the company's atmosphere had become too intense." Jerome's heart sank. He had anticipated challenges, but he hadn't expected people to leave. He glanced back at the survey results, his mind racing. "I don't want anyone to feel like they're being forced out or that they're not welcome here." "I know," Laura said gently, "but this is the reality of what we're dealing with. You took a strong stand, and while a lot of people support you, there are those who feel threatened by it." Jerome leaned back in his chair, staring up at the ceiling. "I didn't want this to turn into a witch hunt. I just wanted to hold one person accountable." "And you did," Laura said firmly. "But now we have to focus on healing and rebuilding trust. People need to know that this is about creating a better environment, not tearing down what they know." Jerome nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over him. You're right. We need to make it clear that this is about building something positive, not punishing people for past mistakes. I've scheduled a meeting with the staff at the hotel, Laura said. I think it would help if you spoke to them directly. They need to hear from you, to understand what your vision is moving forward. Jerome considered this for a moment, then nodded. I'll do it. They need to know that I'm not the enemy, that I'm on their side. The meeting was scheduled for the next day, and Jerome spent the evening preparing his remarks. He wanted to be honest with the staff, to acknowledge their concerns, while also reinforcing the need for change. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to show them that this wasn't just about one man or one trial. It was about the future of the entire company. The following morning, Jerome arrived at the hotel, feeling a mix of nerves and determination. As he walked through the lobby, he noticed how different it felt without James Parker's presence. There was a sense of relief, but also an undercurrent of uncertainty. He entered the conference room where the staff had gathered, their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Jerome took a deep breath and stepped up to the front of the room. Thank you all for being here today, he began, his voice steady. I know the past few weeks have been difficult for everyone. There's been a lot of uncertainty, a lot of fear about what comes next. I want to take this opportunity to address those concerns and to talk about the future of this hotel and this company. He paused, looking around the room. First, I want to say that I understand why some of you are worried. Change is never easy, and what happened with James Parker was a significant change, but it was a necessary one. I didn't make that decision lightly. I did it because I believe that everyone, guests and employees alike, deserves to be treated with respect and dignity. There were murmurs among the staff, but they were listening. Jerome continued, choosing his words carefully. I know some of you are wondering what this means for your own jobs. Let me be clear. I'm not here to turn this place upside down. I'm not here to fire anyone or to make people feel unwelcome. I'm here to make sure that this hotel and every hotel in our company is a place where people feel valued and respected. He took a deep breath, his gaze steady. That means we're going to be implementing some changes. We're going to be rolling out new training programs, new systems for reporting issues, and new policies to ensure that everyone at every level understands what we stand for. This isn't about punishment. It's about growth. It's about making this company a place where we can all be proud to work. One of the employees, a young woman in housekeeping, raised her hand hesitantly. Mr. Hudson, what about those of us who felt pressured to go along with Mr. Parker's rules? Are we going to be blamed for things that happened before? Jerome shook his head firmly. No one is going to be blamed for what happened under Mr. Parker's leadership. This isn't about looking back and pointing fingers. It's about moving forward together. If you felt pressured to act a certain way, or to follow rules that you knew were wrong, I want you to know that I understand, and I'm not going to hold that against you. Another employee, a front desk supervisor, spoke up. What if we have concerns or ideas for how to make things better? Are we going to be able to talk about those? Absolutely, Jerome said, his voice earnest. I want to hear from you. I want to know what's working and what's not. And I want us to work together to create a better environment for everyone. My door is always open, and I mean that. If you have ideas, concerns, or just want to talk, please come to me. The mood in the room seemed to shift, a sense of hope replacing some of the tension. Jerome felt a surge of relief. They were listening. They were beginning to understand. After the meeting, several employees came up to him, expressing their gratitude and their hopes for the future. Jerome listened to each of them, taking mental notes of their concerns and suggestions. He could see the impact his words had made, and it strengthened his resolve to see this through. Back in his office later that day, Jerome reviewed the notes from the meeting. He knew this was just the beginning of the process, but it felt like a good start. The company was going through a period of transformation, and while there would be bumps along the way, he was confident they were on the right path. Laura entered the room, a smile on her face. That went really well, Jerome. The staff seemed to respond to you. I hope so, Jerome said, leaning back in his chair. I want them to know that I'm serious about this, that we're building something new, something better. They know, Laura said, and I think you're already making a difference. Jerome nodded, feeling a sense of accomplishment, but he knew there was still a long road ahead. There were more hotels, more staff, more challenges to face, but he was ready. As he looked out over the city, the sun beginning to set in the distance, he felt a deep sense of purpose. This was what leadership was about, not just making tough decisions, but guiding people through change, helping them see the bigger picture. This was just one hotel, one part of a much larger organization, but it was a start. And as long as he kept moving forward, kept fighting for the values he believed in, he knew they could create something truly extraordinary. Because this wasn't just about business, it was about people. And that, Jerome knew, was worth every battle, Every challenge, every sleepless night, he turned back to his desk, his resolve stronger than ever. There was still work to be done, but he was ready. For his company, for his people, and for the future they were building together.